now more than ever, people need to go within and plug into that cellular memory, plug into divine source, detach as much as possible from the matrix. Hello again, everybody. This is James Bartley, and you're listening to Bartley's Commentaries on the Cosmic Wars. Today I'm going to talk about how the Asian American pushback, how they were being excluded systematically from entrance into the so-called elite universities. And right on cue, we have this shooting in these Asian massage parlors, sex parlors, and now the leftist Asian American crowd is in a mouth-foaming frenzy, going into hate on Whitey mode. And Mike Adams made a very good point. Mike Adams of naturalnews.com. He said they ultimately want to criminalize criticism of Red China, and I can see that happening. Recent developments also, an ongoing process to be sure, many decades in the making, but perhaps the final nail in the coffin as far as the American military prowess is concerned. The Secretary of Defense, I told you about him before, said he's going after all white extremists and white supremacists and racists in the ranks of the military. And now JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, has come out and said that they've empowered somebody to ensure that there is diversity and inclusiveness in Joint Special Operations Command. The boys in GRU Spetsnaz in Russia and Chinese, North Korean Special Ops, they must be laughing. And I'll give a couple of examples of what they've been doing to American and British Special Ops types. Totally railroading them, throwing them under the bus. And this has been going on for some time as well. We went from a state where the U.S. military, particularly Strategic Air Command under General Curtis LeMay, was the most powerful military force in known recorded history. There was no organization as professional, as efficient, as capable of providing a knockout punch as SAC, Strategic Air Command. And that all went out the window. SAC was stood down in 1992, and during the Bill Clinton administration, they did away with the, not just the first strike threat, which is the core, the basis of deterrence. The whole idea behind nuclear deterrence is, with a force as mighty as SAC, and this is exactly what General LeMay had in mind, that no country in the world would even dream of messing with the U.S. That was what deterrence was all about. They maintained peace. They maintained peace from the standpoint of not allowing the wars of limited extent to escalate to the nuclear threshold. I talked previously about how generals like Curtis LeMay and Nathan Twining were making contingency plans about nuking Red China's industrial base in mainland China. And it must be understood, folks, when I mentioned that, I wasn't decrying that fact. Ooh, these evil military people plotting and scheming with their nuclear weapons. No, not at all. The point I was making was that these are people that played high stakes poker. These are people that their mindset was forged in the crucible of World War II, an all or nothing type conflict, planetary in scale, a war of annihilation. So when I said that these guys were making contingency plans, as they should have been, of nuking the industrial base, what was within reach of their long-range bombers in mainland China, I wasn't saying, oh, that's necessarily a bad thing. No, not at all. You have to look at it from this standpoint, folks. There's an asteroid belt in our solar system. That asteroid belt used to be a very large planet that was blown up. Uranus is tilted on its side. There's evidence of mega warfare on Mars. One physicist even made the point that there's evidence of certain isotopes on Mars highly suggestive of nuclear weapons detonation, thermonuclear weapons, I think he said. So, these aliens, they're they play high stakes poker too. I know people personally who have very clear past life memories as what we would call an alien, going from one world to another, one outpost to another, and blowing them up and destroying them. One of my colleagues has clear memories of going around to reptilian bases in certain star systems and just wiping them out. I know another person who has a memory of going to a reptilian planet and just destroying it, blowing it up. When I look at a guy like General Patton or General Curtis LeMay, it's like these guys just didn't have past lives as a warrior on Earth. They had past lives as a warrior on other worlds and other star systems. The Orion Wars and beyond and before, right? So we're talking that level of conflict. This is something, a subject that goes right over the heads of the New Age la-di-das. They don't want to hear anything, even remotely smacking of negativity. When you talk about aliens that are fighting with each other and the Orion Wars, and they just, all the programming and the entity infestation and hosting just kicks in, and they just tune all that stuff out. And it's part and parcel of how the U.S. military has gotten to its present, deplorable, pathetic state, which is the American military is a woke military. They're a woke military, right? They're all concerned about inclusiveness and not being biased towards gays and LGBTQ types and minorities, etc., 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 right? That's where the indoctrination is focused. Whereas the Chinese and the Russians and the North Koreans and the Iranians, they just focus on mission preparedness, on war fighting. So you can track this. And not only is there a clear progression or a regression of U.S. military prowess from, I would say, certainly by the time JFK took office for his one short term. By then the rot had already set in, but with the JFK administration and the subsequent LBJ administration, and you had sewer scum like Robert McNamara as the Secretary of Defense. Yes, and there were all these defense intellectuals in the Pentagon and all these military think tanks and whatnot. Many of them lefty Poison Ivy League types, right? Or from MIT or some other place, but with this a decidedly leftist orientation. You can see the steady decline, and what they had done, particularly with the Kennedy administration, was this notion of flexible response, where they said, "Oh no, we don't have to have this all or nothing notion of deterrence, where we're so strong that." And understand also, the key fundamental template, the basis of deterrence, is the threat of a legitimate, credible, and devastating first strike policy. Right? Deterrence is pointless and useless without all these other potential foes knowing that if they mucked around too much, the U.S. military, Strategic Air Command in particular, is going to turn their countries into radioactive ruins. And General Curtis LeMay himself said, I'm not going to wait till half of America is an irradiated ruin before I launch a strike. And he was absolutely right. Or what? They're gonna keep waiting until America is just totally devastated. They can't even get in contact with the National Command Authority. Washington is just an irradiated ruin. Washington D.C. And then you're going to think about launching a counterstrike? That's preposterous. The whole concept behind nuclear deterrence was the potential, the very real, credible potential of a calamitous, overwhelming, overpowering first strike, for which, in our example, the old Soviet Union or China would not be able to recover from. So the intelligence wonks, the R&D types, the intellectuals in the think tanks, the defense intellectuals, they came up with this notion of graduated or flexible response, which in practice meant these wars of limited scale, all these brush fire wars, Southeast Asia, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, the utilization of the CIA, and that really kicked into high gear with Eisenhower. For all his goody two-shoes demeanor, aw shucks, he's just an old guy, right? And look at how grandfatherly he looks, and then blowing smoke about, warning about the military-industrial complex, a speech that was completely taken out of context. Eisenhower, aka Ike, was a big fan of covert operations with the CIA. The Dulles brothers played a key role in his two-term administration. John Foster Dulles in the State Department, and his younger brother Alan Dulles in the CIA. Dulles was formerly the OSS station chief in Bern, Switzerland during World War II. They'd been involved in State Department intelligence matters since at least as far back as 1919. They played a role in the Paris Peace Conference. So, with the availability of the CIA and Pentagon Black Ops, you can then, from the standpoint of the global controllers, we don't have to have an all-or-nothing nuclear war. What we can do is start having these little brush fire wars in Africa and in Asia and Latin America, mostly counterinsurgencies against presumed communist threats. And there was real communist threats at the time, but of course both the right and the left were being played by the corporatist. So graduated response, flexible response was really kicking into high gear by the time the short-lived JFK administration rolled in, and likewise when the LBJ administration took over after the back and to the left incident. And coincident with the emphasis on flexible response in the form of these smaller scale wars, which there was no intention of winning them, there was no intention of winning the Vietnam War, right, was the reduction of the offensive firepower of the U.S. military, where the military just got squandered in using conventional tactics in a patently unconventional war, like in the Vietnam War, for example. And even when things got really dicey in the Vietnam War, think of 1972, the North Vietnamese Army Eastern Offensive, that was rolled back by Strategic Air Command, B-52s, arc light strikes, right? Think of the Siege of Khe Sanh. When that happened, it was well known as a Marine base, but there was also a advanced special forces base in Khe Sanh that they don't really talk about. But likewise, strategic bombardment, B-52 strikes, played a key role in lifting that siege. So even within the context of these limited wars, Strategic Air Command, heavy bombardment, played a role, a beneficial role, as far as the American troops that were besieged, right? But along comes the JFK administration, along comes Robert McNamara and his whiz kids, these Poison Ivy League defense intellectuals, never spent a day in the military, right? the rot had really set in by that point. And now you fast forward to today, and you have the woke military. They're all special operations command is all worried about inclusiveness and diversity. You know what's interesting? For some time now, Delta Force actually has women in Delta Force, Special Operations Forces Detachment, Delta Command, better known as Delta Force. But it turns out that the female training staff that puts the women recruits for Delta Force through selection, they have this attitude like, oh no, we're not going to pass any other females. We're it. Well, yeah, but what if you all die off, killed off in training accidents or combat missions, or wind up in some kind of cage somewhere in some funny part of the world? Then what? There's no more women to play that role in Delta Force, but that's the way these female Delta Force operators want it. They don't want any other females besides them. So they routinely fail all these females that go out for selection for Delta Force. Isn't that something? All this crap about inclusiveness and diversity. And the women in Delta Force won't even let other women in. But that's part of the problem. And if the powers that be, they've already used up America. It's a cored out husk of what it used to be. They used the military when they needed it. They used the CIA when they needed it. Now everything's all turned inward. I can easily see a scenario where the Chinese communist leadership says, oh yeah, we can spend 50 million, 100 million of our people or more, as long as we destroy America in the process. Remember, Mao wiped out something like 100 million, perhaps more than 100 million of his own people. The Great Leap Forward, Cultural Revolution. You think they're going to lose any sleep about wiping out even more, or allowing to be wiped out more of their countrymen in a war with the U.S.? So I can see a scenario where Red China already has their tentacles and their hooks deep into the CONUS, continental U.S. They're in bed with all these commie, libtard, Luciferian, leftist governors and mayors in America, in many blue states. They have free access and ingress and egress in the southern border for sure. And now with the Biden administration literally flying in all these people from Latin America, right? Many of them are leftist revolutionaries, I might add, who'd been trained by the Chinese. They're just being, shipped lock, stock, and barrel to the northern states in America near the Canadian border. The Canadian military already in bed with the Chinese military. I can see a scenario where, on the one hand, China and the U.S. engage in conflict, perhaps over Taiwan, perhaps over this BS freedom of navigation issue, or Mischief Reef and all the artificial islands that the Chinese have created over there. And then the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff just treating the U.S. carrier battle groups and amphibious ready groups as so much fodder and so many chips on a poker table. They put them in an impossible, can't-win situation in the Pacific against the Chinese. Understand that just about every war game they've played out involving the Chinese against the U.S. Navy and the U.S. military, the Chinese invariably won. So I can see a scenario where they get into a shooting war in Asia, and now that China has this bilateral agreement with Iran, not just a commercial agreement, but also a military agreement, training the Iranian military. Chinese military advisors embedded in the Iranian military. So, and the fact that the Iranians could utilize all these proxies, when you think about it, like Hezbollah and others, they've been stirring the pot. The U.S. and NATO and those types in Syria once again, right? So getting back to my point, I can see a scenario where the U.S. gets into a shooting war with the Chinese. It may even escalate to the utilization of theater tactical level nukes, and maybe more than that, right? But at the same time, in the continental U.S. and in Alaska, there's this Chinese troops running amok because they have the run of the place, right? Meanwhile, the U.S. military is all woke now, right? People like General Patton and General LeMay and Ulysses S. Grant, they must be spinning in their graves if they knew what was going on with the military today. You have to understand that the left media has had it in for American military icons for a long time. They will sing the praises to the high heavens to perfume princes like Wesley Clark and David Petraeus. David Petraeus is a shapeshifter. They'll talk them up about how great they are when they're just a bunch of globalists who come anyway. But the great generals of the past, though, they have nothing good to say about them. In fact, they have everything negative to say about them. Even a recent guest I had, just the mere mention of General Curtis LeMay being involved in an MJ-12 discussions and committee meetings, it set him off, basically. And it's understandable. And he probably doesn't see himself as a leftist, but he's been exposed to the leftist journalism, the leftist publications, the leftist media. Go out and watch a movie called Dr. Strangelove, where they have this Air Force general who has like erectile dysfunction issues, and so as a way of overcompensating, he wants to launch a nuclear strike against the Soviets, right? It was a thinly veiled smear against General Curtis LeMay, one of the most brilliant commanders in history. And who was the director of Dr. Strangelove? Well, none other than Stanley Kubrick. The same guy who gave us the fake moon landing, the same guy who gave us the Eyes Wide Shut, right? And then he puts this movie out, which all the leftist movie critics pointed to the deranged Air Force general in that movie. Oh, that's General Curtis LeMay. Yeah, they were all on the same page, right? And so that's how it is. The military has been, over time, just reduced to a level of impotency, reduced to a level of absurdity. And look how woke they are now. And, when I have time, and some other commentary, I'll talk about how General LeMay forged Strategic Air Command, what he did to make it the way it was, the most powerful military force in known recorded history. I'm sure the Atlanteans and Lemurians and other advanced civilizations in a distant past had, perhaps more powerful, certainly more powerful military forces, but just in our recent times, there's nothing even remotely close to Strategic Air Command. Nothing. And yet it's just been lampooned. The person who made it the way it was, and I would go on the record as saying that it was SAC, Strategic Air Command, first under General LeMay, and then his successors, starting with General Thomas Power, who was one of his B-29 bomb wing commanders in the Marianas Islands in World War II. I would say a cogent argument could be made that it was SAC that prevented all-out nuclear warfare, because the Soviets and the Chinese wouldn't have dared to try anything because they knew the consequences. People always blow smoke, leftists especially. Oh, the Cuban Missile Crisis, we were so close to nonsense. There was no chance of a nuclear exchange. Strategic Air Command would have wiped out the Soviets, and the Soviets knew it. Soviets backed off. But once again, the leftist media, the leftist journalists, the leftist publications, oh, this crazy LeMay was trying to bully boy, JFK in these executive committee meetings, ex-com meetings. That wasn't the case at all. Just about every movie you see about the Cuban Missile Crisis. There's this, character playing General LeMay that's just, getting in Kennedy's face and just being a bully. And no, that's not what happened. But it was the threat of what SAC could do. But by that point, LeMay was Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the highest ranking commander in the United States Air Force. And I remind the listeners that LeMay, Nathan Twining, General Hoyt Vandenberg, who passed away in 1950, Vandenberg became Chief of Staff of the Air Force in 48. And he passed away in 1950. But all those three people, Twining, LeMay, Vandenberg, were essentially MJ-12ers. LeMay was not an official MJ-12 member, but back in those days, in the late 40s, before he became Supreme Commander of the U.S. Air Forces in Europe, as a matter of fact, it was General LeMay who fed Berlin, the 1948 Berlin airlift. Okay, that was LeMay. It's not just bombs away LeMay. He fed those Germans who were cut off by the Soviets. He provided coal to them to keep them from freezing in the winter. So those three top commanders and others were deeply involved in alien issues. And it goes back to what I said before. It's for them to be as effective as they were in World War II, it had to be a karmic thing. I seriously doubt that light came on and suddenly they were doing all this extraordinary stuff in World War II with relatively primitive technology to work with. No, I think that not only have they had past lives, some of these guys, as a high-level commander on Earth, and even going back pre-Atlantean days, but I think some of these guys had past lives on Mars, in the Orion Wars, and etc., right? So, we need to keep. I keep that point in mind. You don't have to believe anything that I say, right? But let's fast forward today. You have Digital Joe, right? Did you see the video of him walking around lost in a hardware store? I mean, he can't even string two words together. I'd rather see Digital Joe than Pedo Joe, because seeing Pedo Joe stumble over his words irritates me, because that means the sewer scum is still out there somewhere, just probably assaulting underage kids or something, right? Whereas Digital Joe, it's Digital Joe when he's speaking coherently and very forthright and making sense, comprehensible. That's Digital Joe with the green screen and the voice morphing, and you can see very little muscle activity, facial muscle activity, like around his eyes, around his jaws, but you just see his mouth moving, because that's all digitized, right? And now Digital Joe, Pedo Joe, is making all these bellicose statements, openly threatening to launch a cyber attack on Russia, right? And credit to Putin for having patience about all this stuff. You know what I mean? Because he knows he's not dealing with someone who's actually running things. The notion that Digital Joe / Pedo Joe is in control of the nuclear football, i.e. the launch codes, that's preposterous. Not even Camel Hair Harris would have access to the nuclear launch codes. It's just probably some Chinese communist guy somewhere, or some lefty Luciferian general in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, right? So consider that no more first strike threat. Deterrence goes out the window. During the Clinton administration, they did away with not only the first strike policy, the threat of a first strike policy, which was the bedrock of deterrence, but they swore off launch on warning. So in other words, even if it looks like a near certainty, 100% certainty that America is going to get nuked and hit with hydrogen bombs too, that doesn't matter. The U.S. can take it, right? And then maybe they'll think about launching a counterstrike. How do you think the Chinese feel when they hear that. Which is probably, who knows, it was probably their idea to begin with, right? When you consider just how much control that the Chinese commies had in the Bill Clinton administration. And I have to wonder, you military types out there, it's like, why? When you look what they've done to the special operators in America and Britain, Danny Nightingale, an SAS sniper, he served all over the place. Severely traumatized. He was part of Task Force Black in Iraq. He was gifted a Glock pistol from the Iraqi military that was working with Task Force Black. And then shortly before he was to rotate back to the UK, two of his good SAS buddies were killed in I think a helicopter crash, and he was distraught. He had to help make arrangements to bring the bodies back and the whole bit. And then he went to Brazil to take part in some kind of marathon, right? During which, in the early stages of this marathon, I think it could have been some kind of Ironman thing. I'm not sure of the details, but it consisted of a lot more, I think, than just running around. But anyway, Daniel Nightingale suffered a seizure. I mean, he was seizing up, spazzing out, flopping around, suffered severe brain damage. And it took many, many months for him to recover. He didn't even know he had children when he rotated back to the UK. So is it any surprise that Glock that he was gifted, which was put into a storage case, sent back to the UK, is it any surprise that he forgot to declare it, right? So when it emerges that he brought back this Glock without letting the authorities know that, I'm bringing the souvenir back. Well, remember, he had seizures and brain damage and all this other stuff. Two of his best friends were killed in an accident in the SAS. It slipped his mind. Didn't matter. They threw the book at him. Right? And eventually, I mean, he was let out of military prison after a while, but after all he did in Northern Ireland and other places, and I think he was in Bosnia, and he was in Iraq, and he was in Afghanistan. After all that, they're going to throw the book at him because he forgot to declare that he brought back a pistol from Iraq. Ooh, what a threat! White, soldiers with guns in the UK. Woo, right? I mean, didn't this guy's past service count for anything? Didn't matter. They threw the book at him because you're not supposed to have guns in the UK, right? Look what happened to Aaron Howard, a member of Dev Crew, what used to be known as SEAL Team 6. He's a very good operator. And I was watching his story, his interview on the Chris Thrall show, and what happened to him. He was falsely accused of sexting female members of the Navy, what they call catfishing, where they accused him of taking on the identity, pretending to be a female Navy person and a dietitian, and soliciting nude pictures of other people, civilian and military women, soliciting nude pictures supposedly to help them develop a diet plan and a nutrition plan and a workout plan, right? That wasn't Aaron Howard that did that. He was in Afghanistan at the time, and they never found anything on his computers, his laptop, his cell phone, nothing, no proof anywhere that he was sending these texts out. Didn't matter. They threw the book at him, right? And the whole media went nuts. Turned out that the female prosecutor, a Navy woman, was she had her eyes set on being the judge, and she knew that if she can get a conviction for sexual harassment, out of this Navy SEAL guy, that'll pave the way for her to be a judge, right? So, the bottom line is yet another special operator thrown under the bus, sacrificed on the altar of wokeness, of the Me Too movement, sacrificed on the altar of political correctness, right? And the message is loud and clear. We'll use you all over the world, you military, especially special ops types. And then if we decide to spend you, not only, we get creative. We won't just send you off on a suicide mission, right? Or kill you off like, the dev crew members who were involved in the fake Bin Laden raid, how they killed a lot of them off. Oh no, we'll just accuse you of sexual harassment, of sending nasty text messages, and we'll destroy your career, and we'll have our compliant media just go to town on you, right? So the point of relevance is, for those of you that are in special ops, it's like, has the coin dropped? Have you figured out who or what you're fighting for at this point? And I'd like to ask the aviators that too, the naval aviators, marine aviators, Air Force, Army helo pilots, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force helo pilots. Yeah, it's all fun and sexy flying around in high-speed, multi-million-dollar craft, but do you really know who you're fighting for? Because this is one thing I know about most of you. Most of you won't stand up for the U.S. or the Constitution. You'll go where they send you to bomb and kill and strafe and all this other stuff. But actually standing up for the Republic? Those that are left in the military after they weed out the constitutionalists and the conservatives, they'll just be a bunch of woke, order follower, leftard, Luciferian sewer scum. And the ones that are still there, that haven't been found out yet, that they, are somewhat conservative in their mindset and orientation, I just don't see many of you doing anything, actually. So why not just, if you have the means, if you're an officer and you have the option of resigning, right? Why don't you just say to yourself, you know what, I got all the training from these bozos that I could ever want, and actual combat experience in many cases, and operational experience, intelligence training. Why don't I just opt out? This is where I get off the bus. And now I'll start working for myself, start working for the American Constitution. Well, another thing that was funny was when I kept hearing this stuff about, the military's in control, the mass arrest, Gitmo, and you've heard it all, right? Back when I was in civil service, this is one thing that I knew. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe things have changed, but the return address of who was paying my checks, it was the address of a Federal Reserve Bank, right? So I can't remember if it was in Atlanta, in Dallas, or someplace, but for federal employees, if memory serves, there was an address on the pay stub, and it wasn't the U.S. Treasury Department. It was some bank, some corporate bank somewhere, a Federal Reserve branch, right? So that's who you're really working for. And always remember that the hybrid plantation managers are reptilians, and they're Draco hybrids, and they get up to some of the most heinous evil things, and that's who you're really fighting for. And like I said, just the great generals of the past, Farragut, Admiral Farragut, General Ulysses S. Grant, they would just be shaking their heads at the lot of you. They'd be wondering why do you still do this? I understand that you've got livelihoods, you got families, yada yada yada. Man, start working out a plan B, because many of you will be put in a position where you may have to fire on Americans. And some of you fly boys and fly girls, you just love flying around those high-speed helicopters and jets and whatnot. You can't find many jobs like that in the civilian front. Airlines have been taking a beating since all this COVID crap. And a lot of you don't want to lose your wings. You want to keep flying, even if it means flying essentially for the Orion Draco reptilian empire. That's who you're really fighting for. All this wokeness, all these evil videos of this one black rapper having, you know, having intimate relations with Satan. Right? Now, I'm sure some of you have seen that video by now. That's who you're fighting for, boys and girls. So, just ask yourself, you know, what would General Patton do if he was in your shoes? What would Curtis LeMay do in your shoes? What would Arleigh Burke, the great two-time Chief of Naval Operations for the Navy, what would he be thinking for all you sailors out there? There is such a thing as a karmic consequence. A lot of these evil types, I'm not too sure if they're on the karmic wheel or not, right? Someone evil sewer scum like Hillary, I don't think she really wants to ever be a good person in a future incarnation. You're enablers. And not only are you enablers, but I've pointed this out, and many others have pointed it out. You know, with this warp speed business, you're going to be injected. Look what happened to the sailors. I think it was the HMAS Sydney. It's an Australian Navy warship, Royal Australian Navy. They were all jabbed. A bunch of them came down with cellulitis, and probably other things too. So you're all going to be jabbed, and then you're going to be expected to fight the Chinese, maybe the Russians, maybe the Iranians, maybe the North Koreans. Meanwhile, all these leftist revolutionaries are being airlifted into the northern states like, you know, Minnesota and other places. It's like, what are you doing? Anyhow, I just wanted to share some thoughts with you. It had been a while since I'd done a commentary, and what I'm going to do also for the members, I'm going to go into certain particulars that I think that are that should be brought out. Anyhow, thank you for listening, and thank you for your loyalty and your interest. We've been doing this at the Cosmic Switchboard show for like 5 years now, getting on 5 years. So we've got really good amount of archive material at this point, right? And you know, the best is yet to come. So anyhow, if you like what we do, if you believe in what we do, please go to thecosmicswitchboard.com, sign up and become a member, and we'll see you in the members segment.